Tekashi started calling Gucci out, throwing around snitching claims and questioning his credibility.
Alright, so now y'all believe me? I've been literally saying this shit for 5 years. Let me break this shit down.
Won't do it. Won't snitch on niggas. If I gotta go, I'm gonna go. I done went before. I always snitch on nigga to save my nobody life. Not even my own. I die. That's on my mama.
Exhibit B, nigga.
Yeah, I ain't gonna tell nobody, not even the police. I don't believe in none of that shit. Only thing I believe in is don't tell the police.
Buzzbuster welcomes you back. For 5 long years, he was dismissed, overlooked, and treated like his voice carried no weight. This wasn't ordinary back and forth anymore. It felt like someone had finally stepped forward to collect on every slight, every joke, and every public dismissal that had piled up over time. Suddenly, the whole thing got intensely personal. Right in the center of that chaos, Gucci Mane entered the picture, and that changed the temperature instantly. Then came the real twist. A piece of evidence linked to 6ix9ine surfaced, and the entire narrative took a sharp turn. What people thought they knew no longer looked so certain. In a moment, the conversation flipped, and the internet reacted like it had just witnessed a detonation. When the track landed on April 10th, 2026, everything seemed to stop. Live streams erupted. Short clips spread at lightning speed. Every major platform locked onto the same moment at once. The attention was impossible to ignore.
Ratting is no loyalty, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm a girl, is that loyalty?
Not at all.
It's the truth. So people gonna be, yo, cut to the next shit. Yo, skip this shit. He's spitting too much facts. Skip it, skip it, skip it. I don't want to hear it.
But wait, I gotta ask though, but what's worse though? Banging your homie's girl or putting your homie behind bars?
If I kidnap you, am I your homie?
Hell no.
If I fuck your girl, am I your homie?
No.
If I take money from you without you knowing, am I your homie?
No.
So all the 3 things I just named, am I your homie for doing that to you?
Someone who had spent years being told to stay quiet suddenly stood in front of the entire rap world and delivered a line that cut through all the noise with brutal precision. Now y'all believe me. Those 4 words hit harder than a full verse. They carry the weight of years of mockery, suspicion, and non-stop judgment. For a long time, Tekashi 6ix9ine had been forced to wear a label the culture placed on him and never seemed willing to remove. In the public eye, he was reduced to one thing: the rapper who cooperated, the witness who testified, the man who sat in federal court while others looked on. That image followed him everywhere, online, offline, in headlines and comment sections. In every debate where his name came up, the same accusation was always waiting. No matter the topic, no matter the context, that label showed up first. It became bigger than the music, bigger than the controversy, bigger than anything else tied to his career.
Listen, I'm gonna break this shit down. Remember 6ix9ine situation? Y'all remember the 6ix9ine situation? When y'all say, in the streets, you know what you signed up for? You know what you signed up for? Nigga, they pulled up on some... Oh, this your wedding ring? Let me get that shit. They pulled up on street shit. Now you a businessman? How many excuses? How many times?
Once that kind of reputation locks in, people rarely let it go. Year after year, the narrative stayed the same. It didn't matter what he released, what he said, or how often he tried to push the conversation somewhere else. For many people, the verdict had already been written. The culture had made up its mind, and every appearance, every post, and every mention of his name came with the same baggage attached. That's why this moment felt different. This wasn't just another viral flashpoint or another wave of online noise. There was something more explosive underneath it. The reaction wasn't only about the song itself. It was about what the song seemed to represent. For the first time in a long time, the person everyone had written off looked like he had found a way to force the room to pay attention. Not quietly, not subtly, publicly. What made it so powerful was the timing. The energy had already been building, tensions were high, and people were watching closely. Then the evidence surfaced, the track arrived, and the entire story shifted in real time. Viewers weren't just listening, they were recalculating. People who had been confident suddenly sounded less certain.
Now let me break down this Gucci Mane stuff, right? Gucci Mane, whether he's telling or his cameraman is telling, right? You know what the feds do? What? They're gonna subpoena Gucci Mane, whether his name is what, something Davis, right?
Yes.
I'm breaking it down for you.
Okay.
Once the feds subpoena you, you have to tell. You have to. If not, you go to jail for obstruction of justice.
The internet, which had spent years repeating one version of the story, was now scrambling to process a different one. That's what made those 4 words land the way they did. "Now y'all believe me" wasn't just a quote. It sounded like a challenge, a warning, and a victory lap all at once. After years of being ridiculed, questioned, and branded with a name he couldn't escape, he finally had a moment that made everyone stop and look again. And whether people liked it or not, they looked. No matter how much he shouted, no matter how hard he tried to redirect the conversation, public opinion had already locked in. The culture had made up its mind, and it wasn't changing course. Everything shifted on April 10th, 2026.
That was the day Gucci Mane, a name respected for years and tied to a reputation built on discipline and a firm personal code, released a song called Crash Dummy. The moment it landed, the internet didn't just react, it erupted. As soon as footage of 6ix9ine responding started showing up online, the situation escalated instantly. There was no slow build and no quiet rollout. It went from zero to complete chaos in a flash. One clip led to another, and suddenly those reactions were everywhere. TikTok picked it up. Instagram Reels pushed it harder. YouTube reaction channels jumped in almost immediately. Facebook had it circulating nonstop. No matter where you looked, those moments were spreading at lightning.
This is the weakest shit I've seen since... It would have been the weakest shit ever if it wasn't for J. Cole apologizing after he got dissed. Forget everything I said. Remember I said Gucci ain't gonna make a statement? Nigga, this is a statement right here. Yo, this is it's a statement right here.
By the time April 10 rolled into April 11, the conversation had grown into one of the most heated hip-hop debates in recent memory. People weren't just discussing a song anymore. They were arguing over principles, reputation, loyalty, and whether certain rules actually mean something or only get mentioned when it's convenient. The topic of snitching came roaring back into the spotlight, along with the bigger question of who truly lives by the standards they promote and who only performs them when the cameras are on. What made it even crazier was how little time it took to ignite all of this. 6 seconds. That was enough. Just 6 seconds turned into the most talked about sound of the week. A tiny moment became a full-scale online storm, replayed over and over, clipped, reposted, dissected, and debated from every angle. In an era where attention disappears fast, this grabbed hold of the timeline and refused to let go. Still, before getting into every part of what 6ix9ine said, before sorting through each point he raised and every narrative he tried to push, there's something important that can't be skipped. None of this appeared out of thin air. This wasn't some random moment that suddenly exploded for no reason. There's history behind it. To really understand the reaction, you have to go backward first. You have to look at what Crash Dummy actually represented, why the track was made in the first place, and what was already building beneath the surface long before the public saw those clips. Because once you understand that setup, the response starts to make a lot more sense.
I swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Yo, I'm gonna keep it a beat with you. Getting robbed by your artist, making a police report, then instead of going to get your shit back, dissing the nigga for robbing you. Nah, this is crazy.
This wasn't simply about one release date or one viral reaction. It was the result of tension that had already been forming, waiting for the right spark. When that spark finally arrived, the entire conversation blew wide open. And from there was no stopping it. Everything started with what happened on January 10th, 2026. Because without that date, none of this later drama makes sense. Gucci Mane is not simply a famous rapper with a long resume. In the world of trap music, he is one of the key figures who helped build the entire sound into what it became. Through 1017 Records, he did far more than release music. He opened doors, introduced talent, and played a major role in putting a wave of Southern artists on the map across the past decade and a half. Describing him as a pillar of the culture is not hype. It is a reflection of the record. Now add another layer. An older video suddenly makes the rounds again, and this time it gets played on 6ix9ine's stream, almost like a piece of evidence being presented for everyone to judge. In that footage, Gucci Mane speaks for himself. No secondhand interpretation, no room for people to twist the message. His position is right there in plain view, directly from his own mouth. What made the clip hit so hard was not just what he said, but what it represented. It captured the standards he publicly stood by. It reflected the reputation he spent years shaping. Over time, that image had been projected clearly, repeatedly, and without hesitation. Viewers knew exactly what it meant because it matched the version of Gucci Mane the public had seen for years.
That is why 6ix9ine barely had to say anything at all. He did not deliver a long rant. He did not need a detailed breakdown. A reaction of just 5 words was enough to send the message.
What do you want Gucci to do?
So now y'all believe me? I've been literally saying this shit for 5 years.
I don't know shit for my, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to.
In that moment, the silence around everything else became even louder. The reason it landed the way it did is simple. By April 2026, something had shifted, and it was not a minor change. This was no small misunderstanding blown up online for clicks. The situation had real weight behind it. A recording studio in Dallas became part of the conversation. A federal indictment followed, and 9 people were named. On top of that, a diss track entered the mix and pushed the discussion into overdrive, with social media exploding over claims of contradiction and double standards. For a while, it felt like the entire internet was locked onto one question: how did things get here? To understand why that resurfaced clip caused such a stir, you have to go back and reset the timeline. Start with January 10, 2026. A business meeting is arranged at a music studio in Dallas, Texas. On paper, it is supposed to be straightforward, professional, routine even, the kind of studio meetup that happens in the music industry all the time, where people come together to talk through opportunities, make connections, and handle the business side of entertainment. Yet when a story begins with a date that keeps coming up over and over, it usually means that ordinary setting did not stay ordinary for long. That is the key to why everything afterward felt so explosive. The old clip was not being replayed in a vacuum. It was being measured against a new reality that had already changed the conversation. Once the Dallas studio situation entered the picture, and once the federal case with 9 names attached became public, every past statement started getting re-examined under a brighter light. Suddenly, words that once sounded firm and unquestioned were being compared against unfolding events in real time.
That is what gave 6ix9ine's reaction its punch. He did not have to explain the contradiction people thought they were seeing. He only had to point at it. The audience filled in the rest on their own. Online, that kind of moment spreads fast, especially when it touches a figure with Gucci Mane's level of influence in history. Because when someone who helped define an era is pulled into a conversation about principles, loyalty, and public image, people pay attention immediately. And once they do, every clip, every lyric, every old statement starts to matter a lot more than it did before.
Tekashi 6ix9ine is absolutely losing his mind right now because the internet is letting Gucci Mane get away with being a massive snitch. Gucci Mane just dropped a brand new diss track called Crash Dummy aimed directly at his own signee, Pooh Shiesty. The crazy part is that Gucci is basically admitting on the track that Pooh Shiesty set him up and robbed him.
So the real story does not begin with the stream reaction. It begins in Dallas on January 10th, 2026, when what was supposed to be a business meeting at a music studio became the starting point for a much bigger controversy. What should have been a simple label meeting reportedly turned into the center of a federal case. Gucci Mane and one of his 1017 artists, Pooh Shiesty, whose legal name is Trell Williams Jr., were said to be meeting to settle ongoing issues and clear the air. By that point, Pooh Shiesty had already served time in a federal firearms case. Once he returned home, he stepped right back into music, moving as if nothing had knocked him off course. From the outside, it looked like a powerful return. His name still carried weight, the buzz was still alive, and the comeback seemed to be building fast. Behind closed doors, though, a very different situation was reportedly unfolding. According to federal prosecutors, he wanted to be released from his contract. Instead of that dispute being handled through attorneys, paperwork, or standard business conversations, investigators say the matter took a much more alarming turn.
The allegations claim that when the meeting happened, Pooh Shiesty did not arrive alone. Prosecutors say his father, fellow rapper Big 30, and several other individuals were there as well. What was expected to be a business discussion allegedly shifted into an intimidating confrontation. Federal authorities say a weapon was displayed during the encounter. They also claim pressure was used to force signatures on documents meant to free him from the deal. According to the complaint, valuables including jewelry, watches, and cash were taken during the incident. Investigators further allege that one person was physically attacked. They say the exit was blocked and no one was allowed to leave until the paperwork had been signed. If true, that would mean the meeting had moved far beyond a contract dispute and into something prosecutors viewed as a criminal act.
What made the accusation stand out even more was the level of evidence federal officials said they had gathered. This was not presented as rumor, internet chatter, or industry gossip. The case came through a federal criminal complaint, and prosecutors pointed to multiple forms of supporting material. That reportedly included studio surveillance footage, phone records, location data, fingerprints, and social media posts. Authorities even claimed some of the items taken during the incident were later visible online, adding another layer to the investigation. As the case developed, the pressure only intensified. On April 1st, 2026, arrests were made. Multiple people were taken into custody, turning what once looked like a private dispute inside the rap business into a full federal matter. The picture painted by prosecutors was dramatic. A meeting meant to resolve contract tension allegedly became a forced signing under pressure, with witnesses, evidence trails, and digital records all feeding into the case. For an artist whose return to music had seemed focused and unstoppable, these claims introduced a far more serious storyline behind the scenes. What makes the whole situation so striking is the contrast. Publicly, it looked like momentum, music, and a second chance. Privately, according to the government, there was a conflict over business control that ended in a way no one would expect from a routine industry sit-down.
Gucci even raps about putting pen to paper under duress. Now, an FBI agent actually testified in court saying Gucci gave a full statement to the police about the entire situation. Enter 6ix9ine. He has been the ultimate poster child for snitching ever since his own federal case. And he is definitely not letting this slide.
And once federal authorities say they have video, records, tracking data, prints, and online activity all pointing in the same direction, the story stops looking like speculation and starts sounding like a case they believe they can prove. That is what turned this from a tense contract issue into a headline-grabbing legal scandal. Arrests were made in Dallas, Memphis, and Nashville. Soon after, federal prosecutors unveiled kidnapping and conspiracy charges in full public view. This was not some minor local case. The situation had escalated into something serious, and bond was denied for some of those at the center of it, leaving them in federal custody. Gucci Mane's name surfaced in the paperwork as a person who had identified individuals connected to the incident. Even with that, his public position stayed consistent. He was not cooperating, and he was not planning to testify. Some reports went even further, saying federal agents had not actually received direct communication from him at all. That detail mattered because what happened next sent everything into overdrive. Just 9 days later, Gucci Mane stepped into the studio and recorded Crash Dummy. The production came from Zaytoven, his longtime collaborator and one of the key architects behind some of Atlanta's most recognizable music. Right away, the record felt pointed. There was no slow build, no vague hinting, no effort to disguise the subject. From beginning to end, the song painted a vivid picture of what had taken place inside that Dallas studio, all without explicitly naming the people involved. Throughout the track, he describes feeling ambushed. He talks about trust being turned into a weapon. He frames the people around him as reckless, labeling them crash dummies for the roles they played. One line in particular quickly became the center of the conversation. In it, he suggests that paperwork signed under pressure would not stand up legally, implying that the agreement in question was never truly valid in the first place. Once that lyric hit, the debate exploded online. One camp saw it in the simplest possible terms. Their argument was that Gucci Mane had not worked with law enforcement, had not taken the stand, and had not crossed any line that would traditionally define cooperation. From that perspective, Crash Dummy was just an artist doing what artists do, turning a personal situation into music. Plenty of others saw it very differently. To them, releasing a song that appeared to describe details from an open federal case was impossible to separate from the larger investigation. Even if he never testified, even if he never formally sat down with agents, they believed the message itself carried enough detail to raise serious questions. In their eyes, the issue was not only what happened in court documents or official interviews, it was also what was being broadcast to the public in a song while the case was still active.
He claims the industry blackballed him for doing the exact same thing, but gives Gucci a free pass. The rules of the streets are clearly changing in real time, and the biggest hypocrites are finally getting fully exposed today.
That split is what made the record so controversial. It was not just another diss track, and it was not simply a dramatic retelling of a bad night. Crash Dummy landed at the exact point where street politics, legal pressure, and rap storytelling all collided. Every lyric felt like it was being examined from two different angles at once. Supporters heard self-expression. Critics heard something much closer to confirmation. The timing only made the reaction more intense. 9 days is barely enough time for public attention to settle, let alone for a federal case to fade from conversation. Instead of waiting, Gucci Mane moved immediately, taking the energy of the moment straight into the booth. That choice turned the song into more than music. It became part of the story itself. And that is why the record still stands out. It was not just about what happened in Dallas. It was about how fast the narrative shifted, how quickly the internet picked sides, and how one track transformed a legal controversy into a full-blown public argument over loyalty, silence, and where the line really is. Calling out people who haven't even had their day in court yet? For a lot of people, that goes too far. The reaction online was immediate, and one phrase kept popping up everywhere: dry snitching. Among everyone weighing in, there was one person whose opinion carried more weight than almost anyone else. After years of hearing that he should keep his mouth shut, that silence finally broke. What happened on that stream didn't feel like random internet content. It felt bigger than that. It felt like a turning point. The setting made it impossible to ignore. Aiden Ross was hosting, the cameras were rolling, and sitting right in the center of the moment was Daniel Hernandez, the artist the world knows as Tekashi 6ix9ine.
To understand why that appearance hit so hard, you have to go back and look at the full story. In 2018, Tekashi was just 22. His rise had been explosive. He had the kind of image people instantly recognized, whether they liked it or not. His music was everywhere. One song after another kept his name in constant rotation, and it seemed like his fame was moving faster every single week. At the exact same time, though, another reality was closing in on him. A federal RICO case was hanging over everything. This wasn't a minor problem that could be brushed aside with good publicity or internet buzz. It was serious, and the stakes were enormous. If he had decided to take that case all the way and fight it head on, the consequences could have reached deep into what should have been the prime of his life. That pressure is what gives the next chapter so much weight. Instead of going down with everyone else tied to the case, he made a choice that changed his reputation forever. He cooperated with federal authorities. There's no need to soften it or dress it up with nicer language. He took the stand. He testified against his co-defendants in the 9 Trey Gangsta Bloods case. Names were given, details were laid out, information was shared in open court. Then came the part that stunned so many people watching from the outside. He got out of federal custody far sooner than most expected. That outcome changed the conversation around him overnight. Before that, he had already been one of the most controversial figures in music. Afterward, the debate around him became even louder, harsher, and far more personal. For a lot of people, there was no separating his career from what happened in court. The label followed him everywhere. No matter what he released, no matter what he said, no matter how much time passed, the same accusation kept chasing him. That's why this recent moment landed the way it did. When someone with that kind of history speaks on a conversation about exposing people before trial, people listen differently. Every word carries baggage. Every reaction feels layered. It's not just another celebrity giving an opinion online. It's someone whose name has become part of a much larger argument about loyalty, cooperation, public image, and how the culture decides who gets forgiven and who doesn't. What made the stream feel so intense wasn't only who was there, it was everything hanging in the background. Years of criticism, years of jokes, years of being used as the example in conversations about street codes, courtroom testimony, and public fallout. Then suddenly, there he was again, in front of a huge audience, stepping directly into a topic that connects to his own story more than almost anyone else's. That's why it didn't play like simple entertainment. It felt loaded. It felt uncomfortable for some people, fascinating for others, and impossible to scroll past either way. Because once Tekashi 6ix9ine entered that conversation, it stopped being just another debate on a stream. It became a reminder of one of the most talked about turns in recent hip-hop history, and why people are still arguing about it now.
When Gucci Mane dropped Crash Dummy, it didn't just sound like music, it sounded like evidence. And that's where everything got uncomfortable, because the details were too specific, too familiar, too aligned with what people were already hearing behind the scenes.
It was one of the iciest industry shutdowns any artist has faced in a long time. The backlash hit almost instantly. Collaborations vanished, performance opportunities dried up, promoters stopped calling. Booking him became something most people wanted no part of. Whenever he tried to speak about how the business really works, the conversation seemed to end before he could fully make his point. His name stopped being just a name. Instead, it became a symbol. People used him as the standard for testing street credibility. In other circles, he became the cautionary tale everyone referenced. Sometimes, he was reduced to the joke people threw into the middle of a debate.
Still, beneath all the noise and criticism, one idea never left him alone. For 5 years straight, 6ix9ine kept circling back to the same challenge. What happens when the spotlight shifts? What happens when the pressure that once landed on him ends up falling on somebody else? What happens when the people who speak the loudest about rules, loyalty, and codes suddenly face a moment where those same rules don't seem to shield them? Those questions sat in the background for years. He didn't let them go. He held on to them, turning them over again and again, waiting for the right opening. By the time that stream happened, it didn't come off like random talk or empty provocation. His tone felt focused. Every point sounded deliberate. There was a sharpness to it, like he had spent a long time building the argument piece by piece in his mind. You could sense that this wasn't something he had just come up with on the spot. It felt prepared, almost like a case he had been organizing in private, waiting for the exact moment to present it. The energy was different. Instead of reacting emotionally, he looked like someone finally stepping into a conversation he believed had been one-sided for too long. That was the real twist. Rather than defending himself in the usual way, he turned the entire narrative around. He pushed the attention back onto the very people who had used his name as an example for years. Suddenly, the questions weren't only about what happened to him. Now the focus was on whether the standards being preached were ever consistent to begin with. To make that point, he reached for receipts. He brought up older clips of Gucci Mane speaking about loyalty, silence, and how certain principles are supposed to be upheld. He replayed those moments, not casually, but with purpose. Each clip was positioned to remind viewers of what had been said publicly before. After that, he placed those past statements beside everything that has unfolded since April. That contrast was where the tension really started to build. On one side, there were firm words about how things should be handled. On the other, there was the reality of what people believe they've seen happen afterward. The comparison did most of the talking. That's why the stream landed the way it did. It wasn't just noise. It wasn't only about going viral or stirring up attention for the sake of attention. The way he framed it made it feel like an attempt to expose what he saw as a double standard. For years, he had been the easy target, the name everyone pointed to when they wanted to make a larger point. This time, he was asking what happens when the same microscope gets turned around. And whether people agreed with him or not, that question was hard to ignore. By 2026, the comparison was sitting out in the open for everyone to see. There was no way to dodge it, no way to pretend the similarities weren't there. Instead of backing off, he leaned in even harder. That's when the conversation stopped being awkward and started feeling explosive. At that point, he pushed the issue into even more sensitive territory. He openly argued that Gucci was receiving a level of patience and forgiveness he believes was never offered to him, and he tied that difference directly to race. In his view, public reaction changes depending on who a person is and what they look like. The second he said it, the internet lit up. Reaction was immediate. Comment sections turned into battle zones almost instantly, with people picking sides in real time. Some felt he was exposing a double standard that rarely gets addressed honestly. Others believed he was oversimplifying a much bigger issue. Either way, there wasn't much room for neutrality. The debate spread fast, and every platform seemed to have its own version of the same argument unfolding at once. What made the moment even more unexpected was what happened next. The tone shifted away from pure frustration and social commentary and moved into something much more specific. Suddenly, it wasn't just about feelings, public perception, or culture. It became a breakdown of the legal system itself, and that caught a lot of viewers by surprise. One of the most striking parts of 6ix9ine's rant had very little to do with personal grievance. Instead, it came from the way he described the federal process from the perspective of someone who has actually gone through it. This wasn't hypothetical for him. He's been in that position.
He sat in courtrooms, watched the case unfold, and seen official paperwork with the title United States of America versus Daniel Hernandez. That kind of experience gives a person a very direct understanding of what those words actually carry. As he kept talking, the explanation got more detailed. He started separating state cases from federal ones in a way that even people who closely follow legal stories said sounded largely accurate. That's part of why this section landed so differently. Viewers weren't just hearing anger anymore. They were hearing someone describe a system from the inside, using details that suggested he knew exactly how serious those distinctions can be. He focused on the gap between state charges and federal charges, and why that difference matters so much.
And suddenly, fans weren't just listening. They were analyzing, breaking down lyrics like clues, matching words to real events. And that's when the accusation hit hardest. Not snitching, but something even more confusing. Dry snitching. Telling the story without officially telling it. Putting it out there without stepping into a courtroom.
For casual viewers, those terms often get blended together like they mean the same thing. He made it clear they don't. According to the way he laid it out, once the federal government is involved, the entire situation changes. The scale changes, the pressure changes, the stakes rise immediately.
That gave the stream a different kind of weight. Up to that point, plenty of people may have expected another emotional outburst, another headline-making rant built on controversy and reaction. Instead, the discussion became more layered. He was still speaking with intensity, but now there was structure behind it. There was a system being described, not just a grievance being vented. That shift is a big reason the clip spread the way it did. It wasn't only dramatic because of the accusations or the race discussion. It kept gaining attention because it mixed confrontation with a surprisingly technical explanation. In one moment, he was making a cultural argument that divided audiences. In the next, he was walking viewers through how federal cases operate from the perspective of someone who has lived through one firsthand. Whether people agreed with his larger point or not, that section changed the energy completely. The stream stopped feeling like a simple rant and started sounding like a challenge, not just to public opinion, but to the way people casually compare cases without understanding the legal differences behind them. And once it reached that level, the conversation got much harder to dismiss. The moment a federal grand jury subpoena lands in front of you, the pressure stops being theoretical. It becomes immediate, heavy, and impossible to ignore. That was the point he wanted to drive home, and he left no room for confusion. One message came through louder than anything else. In federal court, the idea of street code means nothing. It offers no shield, no escape route, and no special exception once a judge commands testimony. Whatever rules people believe exist outside the courtroom, do not follow them inside. At that stage, the system runs on its own terms. His argument stood out was that he was not trying to turn it into a personal attack on Gucci Mane. He was not reducing the conversation to whether someone was good or bad. Instead, he pushed the discussion to a much larger level. His real claim was about power, structure, and how the federal system operates once it decides to act. According to him, that machine is indifferent. Status does not matter. Reputation does not matter. Years of respect, influence, or history in the game do not matter either. None of that changes the process. Once the federal system begins moving, it does not stop to consider image, legacy, or public standing. It applies pressure the same way, no matter who is caught in its path. That idea is what gave the moment its weight. He was not describing a world where loyalty or personal codes can override legal orders. He was describing a system that does not recognize those values in the first place. In that framework, a person's name carries no special protection. The machine keeps going, and it treats everyone as subject to the same force. Just when it seemed like the stream had already reached its peak, the tone shifted again. After all the clips had been played, after every explanation and reaction had built up more tension, he did something nobody expected. 6ix9ine reached for a piece of paper and began reading a Bible verse aloud. That sudden turn changed the energy instantly. For some viewers, it landed with real emotional force. It felt serious, reflective, maybe even revealing. Others saw it in a completely different way. To them, it felt jarring, disconnected, almost impossible to place after everything that came before. Yet whether people embraced it or questioned it, the moment still accomplished something important. It forced everyone watching to make a decision about what they believed they were hearing. By reading that verse, he drew a line under everything he had just argued. It was no longer just a stream full of commentary, clips, and rising tension. It became a statement about how he wanted the entire message to be understood. That is what made the ending so memorable. The conversation had already moved through pressure, consequences, loyalty, and the reality of federal authority. Then, at the last second, it shifted into something that felt symbolic. Not because it answered every question, but because it revealed how he chose to frame the entire situation.
But does that make it different? Or just smarter? Because once your words are out, you can't take them back. And now the biggest question is hanging in the air. Was this a response or a mistake that changed everything?
By the time the moment was winding down, the audience was left sitting with more than just the argument itself. They were left with the tone of it, the intention behind it, and the strange final image of 6ix9ine reading scripture after laying out a cold, hard view of how the system works. Whether that felt powerful or misplaced depended entirely on the viewer. Either way, the message had already landed. Once those clips were sliced into snippets, reposted, captured, and blasted across the internet, there was no containing it anymore. The moment had escaped. Whatever happened next was going to play out in full view, and the impact was headed straight for the center of the rap conversation. That only led to one outcome. Everyone felt the need to weigh in. By the morning of April 11th, 2026, the footage was already spreading at an unbelievable pace. This wasn't ordinary online buzz. It was the kind of breakout moment hip-hop sees only a few times in an entire year. The kind that jumps beyond music circles and becomes impossible to ignore.
Soon, it wasn't just dedicated rap fans paying attention. People with no connection to the culture were suddenly seeing the clips on their timelines. Co-workers were bringing it up in random conversations. Relatives who barely knew the artists involved were trying to piece together names, sides, and backstory. It had reached that level. Meanwhile, the algorithm did what it always does when controversy catches fire. It took those clips and shoved them into every possible corner of the internet. One scroll on any app, and there it was again. Another post, another reaction, another breakdown, another theory. No matter where you looked, the same moment kept reappearing. Buried underneath that flood of posts was the real reason the story got even bigger. Nobody could give a clean, simple answer about what it all meant. There wasn't a single interpretation people could rally around. No clear consensus, no neat explanation. Just confusion, speculation, and a lot of people trying to sound certain in the middle of uncertainty. That kind of situation always creates the perfect setup for nonstop debate. The second it became obvious there was no agreed-upon version of events, opinions started flying in from every direction. Some people were convinced they understood exactly what had happened. Others were reading it completely differently. Certain voices tried to turn it into a larger statement about the state of rap. Others treated it like a personal clash. Every angle showed up at once, and none of them lined up. The conversation didn't slowly build either. It exploded instantly. Timelines filled up with reactions, side takes, hot takes, and counter-arguments. One person would post a confident breakdown, only for someone else to dismiss it minutes later. The noise kept stacking on top of itself until the whole thing felt less like a discussion and more like a digital pile-up.
Out of all that chaos, one name was among the first to cut through with the reaction people actually paused for: Freddie Gibbs. Just hours after Crash Dummy dropped, he took to Instagram stories and said what a lot of people were already thinking, but hadn't put as directly. That's what made his post hit harder than the average reaction. It didn't feel like random commentary tossed into the pile. It felt sharp, timed, and deliberate. At that point, the story had already grown beyond the original clips. It wasn't only about what was said or shown anymore. Now it was about who would respond next, who would choose a side, and who could say something strong enough to shift the conversation. Once that happens in rap, the moment stops being a clip and starts becoming an event. That was the stage everything had reached by that morning. The footage was everywhere, the internet was in overdrive, and the entire space was waiting for the next voice to step in and push things even further. Freddie Gibbs was one of the first to do it, and from there, the temperature only kept rising. He reacted the only way he knew how, with a joke that instantly cut through the noise. In his view, the whole thing felt so unreal it had to be AI.
because there was no chance Gucci Mane would really put out a song about a federal case over a Zaytoven production. That setup alone got attention. But the next line is what really took off. His quote was short, blunt, and impossible to ignore. A man had snitched on a Zaytoven beat. Almost immediately, that phrase escaped the moment and became internet fuel. It showed up in screenshots, reposts, reaction posts, and captions across every platform. People grabbed it and ran with it at full speed. The line was catchy, sharp, and just absurd enough to become a meme overnight.
What made the reaction even more surprising was who seemed to agree. Freddie Gibbs and 6ix9ine were both echoing the same basic point. That alone turned heads. These are not two figures fans expect to see aligned on anything, yet here they were landing in nearly the exact same spot.
So once you've been in the feds, you get out, you understand the power of snitching, because everybody snitches. Because that's why they got the conviction rate of 98%, because everybody who goes to the feds, they really plead guilty or they tell. It's not no like fighting trial and people beating it, because they don't even take the case unless they got all the evidence. They're not just taking cases.
Right.
They taking cases that they know they got you. They ain't even coming to me.
Their rare overlap became a subplot of its own, adding another layer to an already chaotic conversation. Soon after, DJ Academics jumped into the debate, and he brought a much louder version of the argument. His angle wasn't identical, but his conclusion pointed in the same direction. He leaned hard into the idea that hip-hop was applying one standard in one era and a very different standard now. During the live stream, Academics said flat out that the culture owes 6ix9ine an apology. His reasoning was straightforward. In 2018, when 6ix9ine cooperated with the government, the response was immediate and ruthless. There was no room for context, no patience for explanation, and no appetite for a larger conversation. He was pushed out, criticized from every direction, and treated like the issue was already settled. As far as much of the rap world was concerned, the verdict had been delivered on the spot. Now fast forward to 2026, and suddenly the mood around a similar topic looks very different. That contrast is what Academics was hammering home. From his perspective, the reaction to Gucci Mane suggested that the rules were no longer being enforced the same way. Instead of total rejection, there was debate. Instead of instant exile, there were think pieces, defenses, jokes, and split opinions. That inconsistency became the heart of the argument.
For some people, the issue wasn't even about choosing sides. It was about the shift itself. How could one artist be completely shut down for cooperating, while another could enter the conversation and trigger a more mixed, even flexible response? That question kept spreading because it touched a nerve people in hip-hop have argued about for years. Who gets judged harshly, who gets a pass, and why? Once Academics framed it that way, the discussion got even bigger. It was no longer just about one song, one beat, or one viral quote. It became a referendum on memory, loyalty, and selective outrage. Fans and commentators started comparing timelines, reactions, and reputations. The deeper people looked, the messier the whole thing became. And that is why the moment hit so hard. A joke turned into a meme turned into a larger critique. Then that critique pulled in names who rarely agree, forcing people to stare directly at a contradiction they might have preferred to ignore. By that point, the track was almost secondary. The real story was the reaction around it, and the uncomfortable question hanging over everything. If the standards changed, when exactly did that happen? And who decided it? He's speaking on a live federal case connected to one of his own artists, and suddenly the reaction looks completely different. Instead of the public rushing to a hard judgment, everything slows down. The conversation turns into panels, debates, cautious opinions, and people trying to lay out every angle before landing anywhere. That shift is exactly what set everyone off. People couldn't stop talking about the double standard, yet nobody could agree on what they were actually seeing. One side treated it like a clear-cut issue. Another side insisted the context changed everything. The more people argued, the messier it became.
Even Academics jumped into the discussion and refused to let the point slide. He highlighted something a lot of people seemed determined to skip over. There was already real video evidence showing that 6ix9ine had been kidnapped and robbed before he ever started cooperating. That wasn't a rumor, and it wasn't internet gossip. It was documented, visible, and available for anyone paying attention. Still, a lot of the culture kept acting like that detail didn't matter once they decided what label they wanted to put on him. That was the center of his argument. In his view, the rules were being applied selectively. People were choosing when to stand on principle and when to make exceptions, depending on who the person was. Once that happens, the whole code starts looking inconsistent. If something counts in one case, it has to count in the other. You can't treat one situation as absolute and then suddenly rewrite the standard when a different name enters the conversation. Naturally, that's when the temperature rose. Wack 100 stepped in and pushed back immediately, and he didn't do it halfway. His response was direct. Gucci Mane's case, in his opinion, was nothing like the other one. To him, the difference was obvious and impossible to ignore. The evidence was already in place before the song was ever released. That was his main point. According to Wack 100, investigators already had material to work with. The studio had surveillance cameras running, phone activity had already been recorded, location information had already been tracked. In other words, the foundation of the case wasn't created by the music, it was already sitting there. From that perspective, Gucci didn't provide prosecutors with some brand new piece of the puzzle. He wasn't introducing fresh evidence that authorities had no way of finding on their own. He wasn't opening a closed door. As Wack 100 saw it, the door had already been opened before any lyrics entered the conversation.
That distinction became the heart of the argument. Because once you frame it that way, people start separating two very different ideas. One is adding to a case. The other is speaking on something that investigators already had in hand. To some listeners, those are completely different categories. To others, mentioning anything tied to an active federal matter is enough to trigger criticism, no matter what evidence already existed. That's why the debate kept spiraling. Nobody was really arguing over just one artist at that point. What they were actually fighting over was the standard itself. Is the rule supposed to be universal, no exceptions, no nuance? Or does context matter? Does prior evidence change the meaning of what's being said? And if the facts were already documented before anyone spoke publicly, should the backlash be the same? Those questions kept the whole conversation alive. Every time someone thought they had a clean answer, another detail complicated it. The documented footage involving 6ix9ine forced people to reconsider what they had been saying. Wack 100's defense of Gucci Mane forced a different kind of comparison. And once both examples were sitting on the table, the culture was left wrestling with a problem it never fully agrees on. Whether people are really following a code or just adjusting it depending on who they like. Step into an interrogation room and make an official statement? According to Wack, that is a completely different situation from putting your experience into a song. In his view, recording music about something you lived through does not automatically mean you are assisting the government. He presented it as personal expression, not courtroom-style cooperation or evidence building.
Once that distinction was laid out, the conversation stopped being black and white. Suddenly, the issue became far more layered. If someone speaks on a situation through lyrics while a case is still active, does that belong in the same category as directly working with investigators? That is not the kind of question with a quick, easy answer. It opens up a much wider debate, and that is exactly why people kept talking about it. As soon as that point hit the table, everything became more complicated. The discussion was no longer just about one action or one label. It turned into a bigger argument about intent, context, and how people define cooperation in the first place. For some, speaking publicly is speaking publicly, no matter the format. For others, there is a clear line between creative expression and formally helping authorities. That divide is where the whole debate really caught fire. Right when the conversation was already getting tense, Waka Flocka Flame entered and pushed it in a totally new direction. Instead of staying locked in the same back and forth, he introduced a factor a lot of people had not seriously considered. His focus was not lyrics, paperwork, or accusations. He brought up something more practical: security. Waka told a story from his time around Gucci, and at first it seemed like simple setup, the kind of detail people usually pass over without much thought. He described being introduced to somebody connected to the security team. On the surface, it sounded routine, almost like background information with no real impact. Nothing about it seemed explosive in that moment. Then, he revealed the detail that changed the tone completely.
According to Waka, that person had previously worked as a police officer and was now retired. The second that was said, the entire conversation shifted again. The energy around the topic changed because this was no longer just about what someone says in a song or whether public comments count as cooperation. Now the discussion had moved into a more uncomfortable, more complicated space. Waka was not using that story to throw labels around or attack anyone. His point was much more grounded than that. He was talking about reality, not rumors. The point he seemed to be making was simple.
Situations are not always as clean as people want them to be. Sometimes a person with a law enforcement background is present in professional settings, especially when safety is involved. And that alone can blur the lines people think are obvious. That is what made his angle so powerful. He did not come in trying to inflame the argument. Instead, he forced people to deal with nuance. If someone with a police background is working security, what does that actually mean? Does their past automatically define the current situation? Or is it just part of the complicated network surrounding artists, protection, and business? Those questions do not come with easy answers either. By that point, the conversation had gone far beyond a simple argument over who did what. It had turned into a bigger discussion about perception, labels, and the difference between appearances and intent.
Ratting is no loyalty, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm your girl, is that loyalty?
Not at all.
It's the truth. So people gonna be, yo, cut to the next shit. Yo, skip this shit. He's spitting too much facts. Skip it, skip it, skip it. I don't want to hear it.
But wait, I gotta ask though, but what's worse though, banging your homie's girl or putting your homie behind bars?
If I kidnap you, am I your homie?
Hell no.
If I fuck your girl, am I your homie?
No.
If I take money from you without you knowing, am I your homie?
No.
So all the three things I just named, am I your homie for doing that to you?
Wack had already complicated the issue by separating music from formal testimony. Waka took it even further by showing that real-life situations rarely fit into neat categories. That is why the debate stayed alive. Every time it seemed like someone had narrowed the issue down, another perspective reopened it. What started as a straightforward accusation became a much messier discussion about expression, authority, and the gray areas people usually ignore until somebody brings them directly into the spotlight.
In a moment like that, nobody is playing by neighborhood expectations anymore. A totally separate set of responsibilities takes over. Certain people can't afford to look away from what's happening just to protect a reputation or stay loyal to a crew. That was the point Waka was making while the internet kept going back and forth over what Gucci was supposed to do or not do. His argument was simple, but it carried serious weight. Someone connected to Gucci's camp may not have had the freedom to stay silent at all. If a person around the situation has ties to law enforcement, the entire picture changes. Suddenly, it's no longer just about personal codes or public image. It becomes about legal duties, access, procedure, and how an investigation can accelerate behind the scenes. That kind of detail matters enormously in a federal case. One individual with that kind of background can affect the pace of everything. Information can move differently. Certain facts may become easier to reach. A case can grow stronger much faster than people on the outside realize. Waka wasn't trying to pin blame on Gucci or claim he had direct involvement in anything. He made a point of keeping that distinction clear. What he was really doing was drawing attention to how messy the situation becomes when law enforcement is somewhere in the mix. Once that angle entered the conversation, the whole idea of a strict code started to feel a lot less solid. What once seemed black and white suddenly looked layered, fragile, and full of exceptions. Online debates often turn these situations into simple loyalty tests, but Waka was saying it was nowhere near that clean. The rules people talk about so confidently can fall apart fast when real-world legal pressure enters the room.
Just when that conversation was heating up, Rick Ross came in with a completely different energy. Instead of adding more noise or choosing a side in a dramatic way, he stayed measured. His focus wasn't on emotions, outrage, or internet theatrics. He looked at it from a business angle. Ross's view cut through the chaos. In his mind, the situation never should have spiraled to that point at all. If an artist wants to leave a deal, there are established ways to make that happen. The industry already has mechanisms for exactly those disputes. You bring in attorneys, you sit down and renegotiate. If necessary, you structure a buyout. There are formal channels in place because conflicts like this are supposed to be handled with paperwork, strategy, and negotiation, not public escalation. That shift in tone stood out immediately. While others were turning the issue into a loyalty battle, Ross treated it like a preventable business breakdown. His message was that this wasn't some impossible trap with no options. There were legitimate paths available from the beginning. Professionals could have stepped in. Terms could have been revisited. Agreements could have been reworked. The situation didn't have to turn into a bigger spectacle. Taken together, those two perspectives reveal just how complicated the entire story really was. Waka highlighted the legal reality behind the scenes, showing that not everyone involved may have been free to move according to image or street expectations. Ross, on the other hand, emphasized that the dispute itself should have been addressed through the industry's established systems long before emotions and public pressure took over. That contrast is what made the moment so interesting.
One side exposed how quickly outside obligations can override personal codes. The other reminded everyone that business disputes have business solutions. Once both points were on the table, the argument stopped looking like a simple question of who was right and who was wrong. It became a much bigger story about pressure, structure, and what really happens when loyalty, law, and business all collide. Conflict is nothing new in the music world. Labels clash, artists disagree, money gets questioned, and there are already clear ways those problems are supposed to be handled. Contracts get reviewed, lawyers step in, negotiations happen behind closed doors. That's how business is done. Showing up at a studio and pressuring people into signing documents is something else entirely. At that point, it stops looking like a deal and starts looking like a major criminal matter. Rick Ross didn't leave much room for confusion on that point. His message was blunt. Choosing that kind of path doesn't just create legal trouble, it can tear down an entire career, damage reputations, and wipe out years of work in a matter of moments. Soon after, Boozy Badazzo responded, and the tone shifted immediately. There was no media polish in it, no sense that he had rehearsed a clean statement or tried to shape the perfect reaction. What came through instead felt raw and immediate. You could almost watch him trying to process the scale of it as he spoke, as if the weight of the situation was landing in real time. That reaction stood out for a reason. This is someone who knows exactly how serious the federal system can be. He understands, from personal experience, what those cases mean once they move beyond headlines and into official action. Because of that, this wasn't just another trending story passing through the internet. It carried a different kind of gravity. Each time he repeated himself, the mood seemed to get heavier. The words didn't feel dramatic for effect. They sounded like someone realizing this was no longer gossip, no longer speculation, and definitely not just online noise. Federal charges changed the conversation completely. Official statements changed the conversation completely. Multiple arrests happening in different cities at the same time make it impossible to brush aside. Reality had entered the room and it hit hard. Anyone familiar with how that system works could feel the pressure instantly. Once federal authorities get involved, the tone changes from entertainment to consequence. The details stop sounding distant. Suddenly, it's not about image anymore. It's about what happens next, who gets pulled in, and how far the fallout spreads. That's where Honeycomb Razy came in and shifted the focus again. Instead of getting lost in the shouting, the accusations, or the online back and forth, he pointed towards something deeper. His point wasn't centered on petty disagreements or surface-level drama. He was talking about what many people saw as the real damage hiding underneath it all of it. Because in situations like this, the biggest loss usually isn't the public argument itself. It's not the social media chaos. It's not even the endless commentary from people picking sides. The deeper loss is what gets broken behind the scenes. Trust, momentum, credibility, and the sense that people are building something worth protecting. That's why this story landed so hard with so many people. On the surface, it may have looked like another industry controversy. Dig a little deeper, and it started to feel like a warning about how quickly things can spiral when power, pressure, and fear replace basic boundaries. What should have stayed in the realm of business suddenly became something much more serious.
Ross framed it as destruction waiting to happen. Boozy Badazzo reacted like someone seeing the weight of that destruction up close. Honeycomb Razy went even further and pointed to the cost that can't always be measured in charges or headlines. Taken together, those reactions painted a much bigger picture. This wasn't simply about one incident. It was about how fast years of progress can be put at risk when the line between business and coercion gets crossed. And once that line is crossed, the consequences don't stay contained. They spread outward, through careers, through communities, and through everything people spent years trying to build. What makes this story sting isn't just the headlines, it's the sense of what could have been. Before everything unraveled, Steve wasn't fading into the background. He was climbing fast, building real momentum, stacking chart placements, earning serious money, and lining up performances. From the outside, it looked like the kind of return people love to celebrate. His career hadn't stalled. If anything, it was accelerating. That's exactly why the situation landed so hard. Strip away the noise, and what remains is a reminder of how quickly life can change when one decision sends everything in a different direction. A path that seemed solid can shift almost overnight, and when it does, the cost can be enormous. At one point, all the pieces appeared to be in place. He served his time, stepped back into the spotlight, and showed people he still had the same spark. The same intensity was there, the same skill was there, the same presence that got attention in the first place was still intact. It felt like a full rebuild in real time, as if he had taken everything apart and put it back together from the ground up. For a while, it looked like nothing was going to slow that down.
Yet the turnaround came fast. One moment, the story was about resilience and momentum. The next, it became about everything slipping away. People discussing the situation keep pointing to one factor above all else: pride. According to that view, it was pride that got in the way and changed the outcome completely.
This is the weakest shit I've seen since... It would have been the weakest shit ever if it wasn't for J. Cole apologizing after he got dissed. Forget everything I said. Remember I said Gucci ain't gonna make a statement? Nigga, this is a statement right here. Yo, it's a statement right here.
That's what gives the story its weight. This wasn't a case of somebody losing relevance little by little. It wasn't a slow decline that took years to see coming. The rise was still happening. The movement was still there. He had managed to rebuild from zero and convince people he hadn't lost a step. That's why the reversal feels so jarring. It didn't happen after the moment had passed. It happened while the momentum was still alive. As of April 11th, 2026, 6ix9ine remains in federal custody with bond denied. That alone is a major development. Still, there's another part of this that makes the whole situation even more surprising. On paper, he is reportedly still signed to Gucci Mane's 1017 Records. The agreement he was said to have wanted out of is apparently still in effect. That detail changes the way the story reads. What sounds even more unbelievable is that the situation people say involved 4 signatures did not, at least legally, end the deal. In the eyes of the law, the contract appears to have remained intact. So despite everything that has happened, the business tie reportedly still stands. That leaves the story in a strange place. A rising artist, a career that had been rebuilt, a public comeback that looked real, a legal battle that changed the direction of everything. And behind it all, a contract that apparently never disappeared.
There's something especially harsh about that contrast. On one side, you have the image of someone proving he could still command attention after starting over. On the other, you have the reality of federal custody, denied bond, and a professional situation that remains locked in place. It turns what could have been a triumph into something much heavier. In the end, that may be the part people remember most. Not just the controversy, not just the legal trouble. The real impact comes from how close it all seemed to be working. The comeback was there. The talent was still there. The opportunity was right in front of him. And now the entire story feels like a lesson in how fast momentum can vanish when everything turns at once. What started as an effort to break free from a contract turned into something far more serious. Instead of finding a way out, the artist remained bound to the deal and is now also dealing with federal kidnapping charges. That isn't hype or spin. It's simply the reality of how events unfolded. Meanwhile, as the entire story keeps getting louder, Gucci Mane has chosen not to say a word. There's been no direct reply to 6ix9ine's outburst, no public statement, no interview, no social media post stepping in to address the accusations, the talk about street codes, or the viral clips spreading across every platform. Even as the debate keeps growing online, he's remained completely absent from it. That silence has only made people more curious. Maybe it's intentional. Maybe it's personal. Maybe there's another reason behind it that nobody else understands. Whatever the explanation may be, one thing is certain. Silence on the internet never really stays silent. The moment someone refuses to speak, thousands of other voices rush in to fill the gap.
As Gucci Mane stays quiet, the online world has taken over the conversation for him. Every timeline is packed with reactions. Comment sections are overflowing with theories. People are drawing lines, choosing sides, and turning the situation into a non-stop argument that seems to grow bigger every hour. The more the discussion spreads, the more chaotic it becomes. Yet through all of that noise, the spotlight keeps drifting back to the same figure. Not Gucci, not Poosh, not Disty, not even the incident in that Dallas studio. Somehow, no matter how many names get pulled into the conversation, everything keeps leading back to 6ix9ine. For years, he's existed on the outside looking in. 5 straight years of being treated like someone who never truly belonged in that world.
The rainbow hair made him impossible to ignore. The tattoos made him even more recognizable. His image alone kept him separated from the traditional inner circle, and that distance became part of his identity. He wasn't accepted as one of them, but he never stopped watching how everything moved. More importantly, he never stopped talking. While others stayed quiet or carefully managed what they said, 6ix9ine kept pushing forward, questioning everything in front of him. He kept challenging the rules, the loyalties, and the way the system seemed to protect some people while turning on others. From his point of view, the structure everybody claimed to live by didn't add up. The more he looked at it, the more he seemed determined to call it out. That's why his voice keeps returning to the center of this entire controversy. He isn't just reacting to a single moment. He's attacking the larger idea behind it. In his eyes, this isn't only about one artist, one contract, or one studio incident. It's about the bigger framework people keep defending, even when the outcomes seem messy, inconsistent, or hard to explain.
Each time the internet circles back around, it lands on the same uncomfortable point. The person many try to dismiss as an outsider is still the one forcing the biggest questions into the open. He keeps pointing directly at the structure around him and reducing the entire argument to one blunt claim. The code isn't what people say it is. He argues that the idea isn't what many people pretend it is. In his view, it isn't some unshakable rule everyone lives by. It's more like an image people wear when life is comfortable, only to abandon it the moment serious consequences show up. Everything changes when the pressure becomes personal. Once your own name appears in court documents, once the case is no longer a story about somebody else and becomes United States of America versus you, the conversation gets very real very fast. At that point, all the bold talk gets tested. That's when you learn whether that so-called code has real weight or whether it was only strong in theory. According to him, most of the time, it doesn't hold up nearly as well as people like to believe. To be fair, he has never said the code itself is automatically wrong. His issue has always been with how unevenly it gets enforced. In his eyes, the standard shifts depending on the person involved. Status matters, popularity matters, public sympathy matters, where someone stands in the culture matters too. One person may be judged harshly, while another gets excuses, support, or silence. Plenty of people disagree with that point, and the internet has made that impossible to miss. Reactions have been loud, divided, and constant. Still, the developments in April 2026 gave that argument something stronger than opinion. They added specific, documented moments that people could point to. Suddenly, this wasn't just a debate built on feelings, assumptions, or old industry gossip. There were now real events feeding the discussion in real time.
What makes all of this even more intense is that the story is far from over. The legal matter involving Pooh, Shiesty, Big 30, and others is still active. Nothing about it feels settled. Each day seems to bring another detail, another headline, another reaction, and another round of people rushing online to break it all down. Every platform has turned into a running commentary track, with fresh clips, instant opinions, and non-stop analysis appearing by the hour. Meanwhile, the surrounding noise keeps getting louder. Social feeds are packed with memes. Debate channels are pushing strong opinions. Quotes are being reposted out of context. Music conversations are blending into courtroom talk. Fans, critics, bloggers, and casual observers are all pulling the situation in different directions at once. One side treats it like proof of a larger pattern. Another side sees it as selective outrage. Everyone seems to have a take, and almost nobody is staying quiet. Right in the center of that storm, hip-hop is being forced to confront a question that never seems to go away. Beneath the jokes, the uploads, the arguments, and the viral moments, something deeper is being challenged. It's not just about one case or a few names in the headlines. It's about whether the culture really believes in the rules it talks about, or whether those rules only apply when it's convenient. That is what gives this moment its weight. The issue is no longer abstract. It's happening in public, with receipts, reactions, and consequences unfolding in front of everybody. As the case continues and the conversation keeps growing, the pressure is only building. And with every new update, the same uncomfortable question gets harder to avoid.
Here's the mystery at the center of it all. What is this code truly supposed to represent? More importantly, who benefits when it's invoked and who gets left exposed? Some people see it as a genuine rulebook. Others wonder whether it's just a repeated idea people believe in until the moment they're forced to face it themselves. Anyone who has been keeping up with this situation can already tell one thing with confidence. This story is far from over. The tension isn't fading. The questions aren't disappearing, and the debate is only drawing in more attention as time goes on. Each new development seems to push the conversation even further, which is exactly why so many people are still watching closely. There's clearly something bigger happening here, and audiences can feel that the stakes are continuing to rise. If you've been following every twist and turn, now is the time to stay connected. Subscribe to keep up with what happens next. Leave a like if this topic has been on your radar, and share this with someone else who has been tracking the debate from the beginning. One thing is obvious: this discussion isn't getting smaller anytime soon.